of you who are looking at us on Zoom. So good to have you with us. We are continuing our all-in focus with our scripture. We'll be doing the second Corinthians, the 6th chapter today, the 1st through the 13th verses. Wanted to remind us again a little bit about Corinth, the city that Paul has found himself to endear himself to, but yet also have challenges with. Corinth is located on the Peloponnesian coast of Greece, and we'll see a map in a second on that. It's about 48 miles from Athens. So you just leave Athens and run along the coast there, and then end up in Corinth. And if you go past Corinth, you ultimately stop there on the Peloponnesian Peninsula with that. The site itself was built along this coastal plain, and there was one of the reasons, obviously, that there was cities planted at places. We often did it here in our country about where's water around you, or where is an easy place to defend. And that's what the Acropolis was. The Acropolis became a city high on a hill. And an Acropolis is not the Acropolis in Athens, but an Acropolis is wherever they are found. And so Acropolis means high place of fortification. And so for that reason, there was always the place the common people lived, and then the place the richer people lived. And it was up to the common people to get all the goods and services to the top of the Acropolis for those who could afford to pay for those to do that. And so not much different in our world today. We we have folks that care for us, and they come to us where we would like to be on the high place. And of course, fortification was up there to allow them to be protected more so than not. With that, is proximity is on the isthmus of Corinth, which is a narrow stretch of land that extends there on the Peloponnesian Peninsula from the mainland. And we'll see a little picture of that shortly. But according to the book of Acts, after the Apostle Paul left Athens, he spent a year and a half in Corinth. The other place he spent most of his time was Ephesus. And so the Ephesians and the Corinthians embellished him, and they supported his ministry, and churches were started in those locations. And so he actually met Aquila and Priscilla there, which, if you remember, travel with him from Corinth to Ephesus and actually become the leaders of the church when Paul moves on. And so they become missionaries as a part of that. So you'll recognize those names. I want us to, first of all, look at the map that we have. We talked about a little bit of this a couple of weeks ago with that about the location. You got Turkey, which is over here. Ephesus is here, and you go up this way and you come to Istanbul is up in this area here on both sides of the there we go. There we got a pointer going up there too. But anyway, you cross over, and this part is still in Turkey, but once you cross here, you're actually into Europe. And so one of the things that's interesting when you go to these places is you actually transition from Asia into Europe, and you make that transition. And so then you have the northern part up here. And if you remember Kavala, I was talking about that port city that I love so much is there with Philippi, which is right in that area there. So that's up here. Then you go to Thessaloniki, follow your way down to Athens, and then on over into Corinth. And Corinth is really an interesting city. Again, it kind of had a wonderful relationship with Paul, but yet it turned away. And there was a lot of unhappiness in Corinth. And so for that reason, Paul spent a lot of time writing the Corinthians. The letters that we have in the Bible, obviously they're 1st and 2nd Corinthians, but we knew that there was a chain of other letters. And once the letters were sent, they made the rounds, both in Turkey and in Greece, to others with that. So let's move on then to the next picture. One of the things that's interesting is that this is out on the Peloponnesian Peninsula here. If you go this way, you go to Athens, and this way you go to the end of the world, so to speak, with that. And you did that. But one of the things that is an interesting fact about this area is that there is a Corinthian, Corinth Canal. We're going to see a picture of in a minute, but it connects going from here, the Ionian Sea, down then south towards the Aegean Sea here. And there's the Gulf of Corinth that is here. And at the time of Paul, the ancient city is right over here. Today, it is up here, the modern city of Corinth. But one of the interesting things was that there's this canal that was built to connect one to the other to keep it easier. If you go back one slide, if you can, if you see here, one of the ideas that was a long time back, in fact, or as early as the 7th century BC, there was a plan to build a canal to connect these two bodies of water. Otherwise, it is almost a week and a half trip all the way around by boat, depending upon the weather and how things are going, what time of year it is, all those things. And so they came up with the idea, wouldn't it be great if we could just cut across? And so we'll dig this canal. And so it sat there for a long time with that decision. And initially they decided, well, there was question about whether we can really build this canal or not. How do we do that in a way that is safe? We don't know anything about really what's underground. What are we going to hit if we do that? And there was those skeptics that said, well, what if you cut us off here and we become an island to ourselves and something happens? How do we get goods and services across with that? And there was always those, as we talk about California falling off into the ocean, those were people that were afraid that if they did that, the peninsula would fall. The peninsula would lose its contact there. So anyway, though initially then they just used a tract of land, and they would actually unload the ships, put them up on movers, and move them all the way across the 4 miles across land, drop it back in, and then reload all the goods and services. And most of the time, it was quicker that way than going all the way around the Horn there. So you can go back to the picture. There we go, of that. And one of the things that Emperor Nero is one of the people that got really interested in this as a project. And so in 67 AD, he began the canal. And just like we do today in having grand openings of projects around town and the cutting of the rimmet and all that, Nero actually did that. And he was the first one to turn the first shovel of dirt for this new canal to be done. Unfortunately, Nero dies in 68 AD, and other people say this is the dumbest thing we've ever heard of. We're not going to do this. This is too much work to do that. So from 68 AD until 1881, it just sat dormant, waiting for someone to figure out how to do it. And a lot of people tried, and they tried to raise money for it. And people said that we're not going to give money to this. We're working okay without it and all that. And then ultimately it began in 1881 and then was completed in 1893. And so it's an amazing thing, but it's 4 miles long and 87.7 feet wide. And if you look at the next picture, you'll see the canal as it is now. And you can see how deep it is. But because of its depth, today is too narrow for modern ships. And it's basically become a tourist trap, a tourist place to visit because it really does not work well. with that. And part of the challenge they have, if you look at the next picture, is that ships going through have to be pulled through by a tug, because if they use their own motors themselves, then it creates too much wake in the canal. And so it's sea level on both sides. There was another reason they didn't do the canal for a while, is that they thought the Ionian Sea was higher than the Aegean Sea, and that if they opened it, then it would create all kinds of trouble with the ocean. I mean, it's just one of those interesting things. But seeing that now, and unfortunately, the part of the challenge of this too is that the sides, the rock is limestone. And they've had a number of times that the limestone has actually broken apart and fallen into the canal. And then it made it difficult, if not impossible, to actually use the canal. So anyway, it is there today. We will get to see it when we're there in May with this. But it is an interesting thing, and it's a marvel to look at with that. But it has created basically an island for the peninsula out there. Moving on then, I want to take a look at, we've talked about Paul's relationship some with the church at Corinth. Paul deeply loved the people at Corinth. But, one of the things is hard, and I don't know if you've ever been a part of a company, as a lot of you have been, where the primary office or the person in charge is not where you are. And sometimes that creates challenges because you're trying to keep things together in the company. And so in the church of Corinth here, they're trying to keep things running. They're trying to do things as Paul was doing. Their communication is either by runner or messenger of some kind, or they send letters. And so, it's like, what do you think we ought to do, boss? Go run and take a message, and you wait and you wait and you wait. And then ultimately you get somebody that comes running back. Yes. Well, how do we do it? And you send in and so that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. Paul is trying to keep things going well in the church, but yet he's not there to actually give leadership. So he relies on persons who are the heads of the church in that location. And so Paul helped establish the church there, and many people were led to Christ in the year and a half that he was there. As you saw, this port city was a major stopping place for coming from the Far East and also coming from Europe. It was one of those things, kind of like going through Israel, and in that part of the world, it was kind of, this is the halfway point no matter where you're going. And so it was also a port city. And so if you saw, there's there's a sea and a sea that are feeding this peninsula and this very small place of Corinth. In fact, at this time, Corinth is the largest city. It is much larger than Athens because of the port cities that are there. And they actually have 4 ports that served Corinth. So not only is it a port city, it is a sailor town. And so all that goes with that, and one of the things that they had was the world's largest brothel on top of the Acropolis. And so all of these guys would come after being on ships for months. They would come into Corinth. They would go to the local bath. They would get cleaned up, and then they would go visiting with that. And so there was people, though, that were there that helped Paul establish the church, but there were also people concerned in Corinth that they had heard this message about being faithful to God, but yet they had gone part of the way, but they really hadn't fully committed themselves. And so, as in many places of worship, there were those who said, yes, count on me, but you still did all the other stuff. You went to the brothel and you lived a rough life, and you never quite completely committed yourself to Christ. And so some still involve themselves in idol worship. You hedge your bets. You play all the games in town, and just you go to to church and to be a part of the church there in Corinth, but you would also go to the local other worshiping centers, and you would worship snakes and all the things with that. But there were false teachers who had tried to distort the gospel. And so that was one of the things Paul said, come on, guys, hang in there. Help me out here. And Paul was, and some were accusing Paul himself of being a false prophet. How can you follow this guy when he's not around, he's not helping us, and all that. So we moved into some of the challenges, other challenges that were going on there in Corinth. And this is in the book of 2 Corinthians, the 1st through the 7th chapters. There's all kinds of rumors being spread about Paul's ministry, and his relationship with some of the congregation got strained. Kind of like John Wesley in his day. And John Wesley would call to task those who were church leaders, called for revision and reform. And so that's what's going on too. Paul's followers are trying to do that, but yet there are people in the congregation that are against Paul and say, again, we think we know better than that. And then 8th and 9th chapters, Paul was wanting to raise money for the church in Jerusalem. We heard before, and if you remember, the church in Philippi and places like that Paul was trying to raise money for, and trying to help them grow their ministries. And so there were several places in Jerusalem, but also in other locations that he was trying to help with. And then Paul anticipated returning to Corinth. He always wanted to come back. And, in the first, second, and third journeys that he had through that area, second and third, that Paul actually went to Corinth along the way. And then ultimately he was to go to Rome. And once he finished in Rome, he was to come back. And as we know, we don't know what happened to Paul, but his demise happened somewhere, or his death did along that way. And so he anticipated returning back, but he also knew if he returned, he was going to have to get in the middle of all this mess again with that. And so that was part of the challenge that he had. And some of the people there were what he called super apostles. And these were people that were false teachers who infiltrated the Corinth church. They said, hey, here's a group of people, let's get in and let's start doing our thing and try to redirect some of what is going on there. And some of them claimed to be direct descendants of Abraham, not just in faith, but in the lineage that they had, or that they were already perceived as ministers to Christ. And so they were trying to do what they could do. But they also, some of them performed miracles. They served themselves and the devil, again, playing both sides of the fence. And they claimed that Paul preached a weak gospel, just like our preachers here that preach a weak gospel. They were trying to figure out, give us something that we can really hold on to and is tangible with that. But obviously, Paul was by tradition a great preacher. So we're going to look at the first two verses of this. This is from the Message. It says, companions, as we are in this work with you, we beg you, please don't squander one bit of this marvelous life that God has given us. God reminds us, I heard your call in the nick of time. The day you needed me, I was there to help. So we are praising the fact that God is there with us, and God is going to walk with us, and Paul is helping along that way. And then the next slide then, it talks about this chapter in particular appeals to those in Corinth not to receive God's grace in vain. Paul is saying to them, God has given us this wonderful gift. God has been with us and continues to guide us and direct us. Don't squander that. Don't devalue that. Don't make it in vain. Don't disgrace God by the things that you do. Be faithful to all that God has called. And then the day of salvation has come. But unless we stay faithful, it's not going to last. And we've seen that throughout history and time of the church. The church gets very involved and very locally oriented in being in ministry and mission and doing good things. And over a period of time, it just began to wane away. And one of the things that we know about churches and organizations, and we see this all the time in the corporate world, is you're either going up or you're going down. Plateaus are very short-lived in the faith. And this church has been one that over my tenure here has been very faithful to God's call. And each time we came to a point of having to make decisions in the betterment of the ministry here, this church has responded as best it could in that time. But yet we all know there's times that throughout history and time, this church has had great times, and we've had some times that have been of times of challenge. And so that's what Paul is saying to them. It's not going to last forever. So how do we continue to be faithful to maintain that? And as we've talked before, it's as long as one of us is faithful, we still have hope. And so Paul is calling them to do that. And eventually, Christ will return, and the opportunity to receive God's gift of salvation will come to an end unless we live it, and then we live out the salvation that God has given to us. We move on to verse 3 then. Don't put it off. Don't frustrate God's work by showing up late, throwing a question mark over everything we're doing. Ever been late to a party? It's kind of an awkward feeling sometimes when it was to start at a certain time and end at a certain time, and we get there late and we've already missed the first half of the party. The presents have already been shared, happy birthday has already been sung, and we come in kind of late to it all. And what Paul is trying to help us remember is that don't show up late to this. Don't throw a question over everything that's been going on in the church that's been helpful and suggestive. Moving to the next slide, Paul insists that he and his workers have not done or said anything that would keep anyone from believing in Jesus. Part of the things that are being thrown at Paul at this point is, again, that he's not the definitive answer anymore. That he is not the one he's the only one that speaks for God. There's others that can do that too. And so Paul commends his ministry to the Corinthians. He basically is saying to people, come on, here's all the great things that we've already done. Here's the things that we took when we got this church started from where it was now then to where it is now. And let's be thankful of that. Let's be helpful to that. Let's continue to grow the church. And so he gives the Corinthians evidence to present to anyone who would accuse Paul of being a false or heavy-hitting or self-serving agenda. He says, okay, here's the laundry list of all the things. And Paul does this in a number of places in his letters, where he says, here's all the things that I've done. I've been to all these places. I've had these kinds of beatings, all of these things that I have done. I've been in prison. I've done all of these things, not to brag, but just to say, this is how one is faithful to one's call of God. And so then we move to verses 4 through 10. Our work as God's servants gets validated or not in the details. People are watching us as we stay at our post alertly and unswervingly. In hard times, rough times, bad times. Again, Paul's reminding them, we do these things. When we've been beaten up, jailed, or mobbed, working hard, working late, working without eating, with pure heart, clear head, steady hand, in gentleness, holiness, and honest love. When we're telling the truth and when God's showing us his power, when we're doing our best, setting things right, when we're praised and when we're blamed, when we're slandered and when we're honored, true to our word, though distrusted, ignored by the world, recognized by God, terrifyingly alive, though rumored to be dead, beaten within an inch of our lives, but refusing to die, immersed in tears, yet always filled with deep joy, living on handouts, yet enriching many have nothing, having nothing, having it all. So God, again, has blessed Paul in his ministry, but here's all the things that Paul has done, and he's encouraged others to do that. So if we go to the next slide, Paul's evidence includes everything that Paul and his co-workers have suffered in order to proclaim the message of God. And we remember throughout Paul's ministry, especially when he was in dire situations or when he was in prison, he would be thankful for the opportunity to serve Christ in that way. He would be thankful for all God had done for him. And even in the midst of the beatings and the difficulties that he's had, the long travels that he has had, the difficult, harsh situations he found himself in, shipwrecked and all those things, he is thankful. And afflictions included beatings and imprisonment. We've talked about all of those, going hungry. Their character, though, has remained Christ-like, and God's power has been clear seen and through them. Again, he's saying to people, you say that I'm not everything that I claim to be in the name of Christ, but yet here's all the things that we have done. And no matter how they have been treated, they have kept going, accomplishing God's mission. Their sacrifice is bringing the riches of eternal life to many people. He and his team continue to rejoice again in all they do. And then verses 11 through 13. Dear Corinthians, I can't tell you how much I long for you to enter this wide open, spacious life. We don't fence you in. We didn't fence you in. The smallness you feel comes from within you, not in what we do. Your lives aren't small, but you're living them in a small way. You have all these opportunities. You have all this stuff that you can do and be faithful to, but yet sometimes you take the shortcuts and live life in a small way. I'm speaking as plainly as I can and with great affection. Open up your lives. Live openly and expansively. And then the next slide. Paul says they have done nothing to cause the Corinthians to have anything against them. Paul and his co-workers have lived a wide open heart toward everybody and everyone in Corinth. Paul has reached out to as many different people as he can, and no matter their orientation, their background, whatever it might be. And Paul asked the Corinthians to open their hearts to him as children would to a father. Paul is a parent image, a father image to many of the churches that were established during his missionary journeys. He becomes the one that they look to for guidance and direction. The questions that you have are then on the board. What year has been a good year for you? The best year you can remember? What year has been the toughest that you've had in your life? In one sentence, how would you characterize Paul's life? What does this show you about Paul as a person? What you think that way? What are some of the stumbling blocks and sufferings you've had to overcome to be a follower, a faithful follower of Jesus? And how does Paul's life strengthen you in the face of the adversary, the one that is against you? So talk amongst yourselves.
Hello? Hi there. Mario, you're upside down.
Sorry, how about now?
Yeah.
All right.
Nathan, you hear us?
Nathan, you don't look like David. That could be good. No, he didn't like it. He left us.